We had left the streets where the bars and pool rooms and restaurants were, and the blare or whimper of music from beyond the swinging doors. We passed down a grubby, dark street where a couple of boys scurried along by the walls of the houses, uttering short, lost-sounding, hollow calls like marsh birds. The shutters were all closed on these houses, with here and there a tiny chink of light showing, or perhaps the faint sound of voices. Later in the spring, when the weather turned, people would be sitting out on the sidewalk stoops here in the evenings, talking back and forth, and now and then, if you were a man passing, one of the women would say in a conversational tone, "Hey, bud, you want it?" For this was the edge of the crib section, and some of these houses were cribs. But at this season, at night, whatever kinds of life were in these houses, the good life and the bad life, were still withdrawn deep inside the old husks of damp, crumbling brick or flaking wood. A month from now, in early April, at the time when, far away, outside the city, the water hyacinths would be covering every inch of bayou, lagoon, creek, and backwater with a spiritual mauve to obscene purple, violent, vulgar, fleshy, solid, throttling mass of bloom over the black water, and the first heart-breaking misty green, like girlhood dreams, on the old cypresses, would have settled down to be leaf, and not a damned thing else, and the armed, thick, mud-colored, slime-slick moccasins would heave out of the swamp and try to cross the highway, and your front tire hitting one would give a slight bump and make a sound like kerwhoosh and a tinny thump when he slapped heavily up against the underside of the fender. And the insects would come boiling out of the swamps, and day and night the whole air would vibrate with them, with a sound like an electric fan. And if it was night, the owls back in the swamps would be hooing and moaning like love and death and damnation. Or one would sail out of the pitch dark into the rays of your headlights and plunge against the radiator to explode like a ripped feather bolster. And the fields would be deep in that rank, hairy, or slick, juicy, sticky grass, and never get flesh over their ribs, for that grass is in that black soil, and no matter how far the roots could ever go, if the roots were God knows how deep, there would never be anything but that black, grease-clotted soil, and no stone down there to put calcium into that grass. Well, a month from now, in early April, when all those things could be happening beyond the suburbs, the husks of the old houses, in the streets where Ann Stanton and I were walking around, crack and spill out onto the stoops and into the street all that life which was now sealed up within. But now the street was blank and dim, with a leaning lamp-post at the end of the block, and the cobbles, oily, greasy, glimmering in its rays, and the houses shuttered, and the whole thing looked like a set for a play. You expected to see the heroine saunter up, lean against the lamp-post, and light a cigarette. She didn't come, however.